Welcome to episode 7 of the SOCCESS podcast. I'm your host, Greg Morse. Today we have special guests Aubrey Doss, who has joined us a couple times before, and Danny Wilson. They both have worked on the SOCCESS grant, but Danny currently works for MIMH. They wanted to come talk about cultural responsiveness today, and especially among the LGBTQ population. How are you both today?
I'm good.
Aubrey, you first.
Oh, thanks. I'm doing okay. It's a little rainy, a little dreary on my spot. So that's kind of where I'm at.
Yep.
Kind of sleepy.
Danny, how are you?
I'm doing well, trying to maintain my canine working assistant, and she will not be leaving.
That's all right. We like special guests, so. Well, Danny, can you explain more about what you do now, and then what you did with while you were with the SOCCESS grant?
Yeah, so whenever I was working on the SOCCESS grant, I was the youth engagement specialist. What that meant was that I basically kind of participated in all things related to youth engagement, youth voice. I helped with training our youth peer supports and kind of whatever else they needed me to do.
Cool.
And now I work for the Missouri Institute of Mental Health as a research specialist. So I do a lot of grant writing and helping with data management. Right now I'm in the process of applying for a couple grants. So yeah.
Cool. Well, you both wanted to talk about cultural responsiveness today, and so can you both can take turns kind of explaining what that is for us. Danny, if you'll go first.
All right. So cultural responsiveness is kind of, the way I see it, a step up from cultural competence. And what that means is that for people to assume that they're culturally competent, they would say that they know a lot about different cultures, and they know how to be sensitive of the tons of different experiences that exist in the world today. Cultural responsiveness kind of takes that a step further. And while it doesn't come into an assumption that we are all just learning as much as we can about every possible thing we could encounter, it means that we are educating ourselves about what vulnerable populations are experiencing and learning how to respond to that in a way that makes everybody feel safe and included and accepted.
Great. Aubrey, do you have anything you'd like to add to that?
Yeah, so I'm kind of talking on this episode today more from a therapist perspective. And so I think cultural responsiveness is more about, for me, how do I take what I've learned about the cultures or what I don't know about the cultures and make that represented in my space and in my session? So how can I make sure that I am being responsive to what people are saying to me, but also in how, just even the feel of my office, how do I ask questions? How do I respond to questions? And being aware of my own personal biases and, the things that I have privilege in, and being aware of those in session is kind of what I think of as cultural responsiveness.
Yeah, that's really important. Which was going to be that was my next question is why is this important? You guys both just did a good job of kind of explaining that. Is there anything you want to add on the importance specifically of cultural responsiveness?
Yeah, so I get asked this question quite a bit, just kind of whenever I'm doing trainings and just kind of as an aside because I talk about it so much. And I think that the biggest reason that this has to be something that's important is because if you look at the statistics on what mental health disparities look like for vulnerable populations, it's really clear that there are people who are disproportionately affected by mental illness and certain other things. Spanning all across health. And so putting this topic into the systems that are meant to be serving others is really important because it can help us fight those disparities.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
So with that in mind, what would it look like for an organization to be more culturally responsive? Danny, I'm going to ask you to lay this out for us a little bit, and then Aubrey, I'd like you to follow up with what it looks like from your perspective, especially at Ozark Center.
Yeah.
So organizations being more culturally responsive would look a number of different ways. Definitely, it would be something that an organization that doesn't make assumptions in whether that be in paperwork or in the way that the way that patients are spoken to when they walk in the door and addressed. It can look like trying to make sure that everyone has the freedom to explain and live their experience without fear of judgment or not having to explain their identity 47 different times with their with the people they're working with, and just having the representation there. Whenever somebody walks into an agency and doesn't see anyone there who looks safe to them or who looks like them, that can be a really big barrier, and that can be kind of an immediate feeling like, okay, nobody's going to know what I'm talking about whenever I try to talk about this problem. So that's I guess a little bit of what that looks like in my head.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So I think from my perspective, like Ozark Center, I know has a CLC committee that I am a part of. So CLC means Cultural and Linguistic Competency. It's a committee. We meet every other week. And so part of what we've done as a committee is like just doing some research on like who are we serving? Who is our area? Do our current numbers of people utilizing our services match those things? So like, if we have a high Latinx population in our community, is that also being reached in our numbers at Ozark Center? And so if it's not, what are we needing to do? Are we being culturally sensitive to that population? What can we do better? Little things that we've done, change our paperwork. Danny was talking about that, making sure we have pronouns that everyone can agree and use. And so they don't have to tell us 50 times, like, that's not my pronoun. And, when our MOS staff is calling, being able to utilize the correct pronoun, making sure all of the different options are available and or that they can write in. It's just a lot of little things. Some other things we've done at our location here where I work is make sure that we have chairs of different sizes, because weight stigma and weight bias it's a cultural thing, and we want everyone to feel comfortable here. And so just really taking a look at our policies, our procedures, what do our buildings look like? It's ever changing. So I really think that having that committee is going to be really helpful in moving forward, because as cultures change, we have to also be responsive to the ever changing needs. So I'm kind of excited about that and what we've done with that.
Yeah, and I've definitely seen those changes take place in the short time I've been at Ozark Center too, and so definitely can testify how to the extent that Ozark Center is and Will's Place are both trying to implement these policies. So, so for the next question, in the emails leading up to this, you guys had mentioned kind of a focus of cultural responsiveness in regards to the LGBTQ community, and so I'm going to let you guys kind of go with that and just explain what this looks like in regards to that.
Okay, so I think being culturally responsive in regards to LGBTQ population is really important. We know that this population has the need for mental health services. So as a therapist, I need to be aware of all the terminology. It's not my client's job to make me understand what they're saying. It's my job to research that and kind of keep on top of that myself. As a therapist, I also need to be able to ask respectful questions, know how to talk about things, and be aware of the biases, especially in our community. I live in a pretty small community, so that can be pretty high. And just being very transparent, in my privilege and being understanding, I think, of what people are saying to me and that their fears and their feelings are real, and being able to address that. Because I think, I don't know if it was Danny or someone else had told me, like, there are still youth today that are afraid to go to their therapist and talk about these issues for fear of judgment. And that tells me as a therapist that we in this field have a long way to go to be more responsive to their needs.
Completely. I agree with everything you said. I also think that this is a kind of specific topic to talk about.
Sure.
Sorry.
This could be like an hour-long topic on its own, so it's hard to summarize it in, I think, 5 minutes.
Yeah, definitely. But I think that it's really important to specify this because people still see it as controversial. So whenever an agency or a person who's working at an agency is actively being a supportive ally, or whenever people are advocating for changes to be made to make some place more affirming, they're seen as political or controversial. And that's just not a good way to look at it at all, but it's also not accurate. There are gay and trans people who are suffering really horrible things because people still see their identities as controversial. And whenever you think about the disparities, the disparate mental health outcomes that are faced by the LGBTQ population, it's especially necessary for these conversations to be happening in mental health serving agencies. Aubrey said it completely correct that, while people are still afraid because they don't know who they're going to be met with whenever they're seeking services for the first time, or whenever they're walking into the reception area of an agency, those are all things that are completely understandable. And I know I live in St. Louis, where it's a little bit easier, not incredibly easier, but a little easier to find affirming mental health professionals. In a lot of the smaller areas, it might seem a lot more daunting. You might be, more afraid that whenever you come in and start talking about your partner and they're not, the opposite gender, then people might immediately start coming to conclusions or trying to talk you out of it, or, being judgmental in any way.
Yeah, I think it's so difficult because I do believe there is still. Do you guys hear that reverberation, or is that just me?
I think it's you. I don't hear anything.
I don't hear anything currently.
Okay, good. Because I can hear it and it's frustrating me. It's only when I talk, though, so I'm hoping it's just, I don't know. Anyways, I was going to say, back to what Danny was talking about, is I think as a therapist, for me, when I look in my office, so just as clients walk into my office, like what I'm hoping for is my culture responsiveness is that my office feels like a blank space, but also welcoming. So that I don't want them to see any of the personal biases I might have. So like, I don't want a lot of religious artifacts because that might make some of my clients feel uncomfortable. Just because what I believe means one thing doesn't mean that all my clients need to know that I should be responsive to them. And keeping that in mind also, I don't know what I'm trying to say. Basically, I feel like as a therapist, when you look at this population in general, your office should represent like a blank space for them to feel comfortable and welcome in. So I don't have a ton of artwork in my office. I don't have a lot of like sayings. I don't have a lot of like words because I do feel like those things can speak to different people in different ways. And in order for them to feel comfortable talking to me, I don't want those different things in my office. So I guess that's kind of what I would like to add to, like, as a therapist being culturally responsive, like your office should be welcoming, but also not show your belief system everywhere. I don't know if that makes sense.
Right.
I
Yeah,
think
and
that, yeah. Sorry, Dan, didn't mean to interrupt you.
Oh, that's okay. And when that also, like, I talked about it in a lot of ways that came from just like the people who are, you know, in like same-sex relationships. But when it comes to also the trans community, there's a lot of fear about if they're going to be respected and referred to properly. So I know that there's a lot of I don't even know if it's jokes, but there's a lot of rhetoric around like asking people's pronouns and how that's, you know, such a forward statement, but at the same time that allows people to tell you how how they want to be referred to, but it also signifies that you know to ask, like, you know enough about being, you know, being respectful to people that you want to make sure they're being referred to correctly.
Great. Well, thank you both for taking a few minutes to really expand on that specific area. I do think it's really important. I know it's really important to both of you. So, just kind of following up on this whole conversation, what are some basic tips you would give for being culturally responsive?
Like as an agency or as a person?
Yeah, let's focus more on the agency side of things, but I'd definitely be open to hearing some personal ways too.
Okay. I think I can start with some agency ideas. If Danny, you want to follow up with maybe some personal.
Yeah.
And if I miss any agency ones, you know, feel free. So I think if you are coming from an agency background, I look at private practice as an agency as well. It's important to know like who is in your community. You know, what groups are there? What are your populations? What are the different religions? What is going on in your community? You can't really be culturally competent or culturally responsive if you don't know your community at all. And I think learning about those populations first will give you a good grounding kind of like basic level knowledge so that you can have more understanding and deeper conversations with people that are walking in your door, versus if I don't even know the difference between the different, you know, Hispanic, Latinx, you know, all of those different populations. If I don't know all of the different ones in my community, that's not okay. It's not okay to assume they all fall into one group. And so I think that's a good place to start as an agency, just looking at who do you have. And then I suggest looking at policies, procedures, like any of your intake paperwork, like, are you representative of who's in your community? And are you also on the cutting edge, if you want to, so to say? You know, Danny had just said like the pronouns is kind of like forward thinking, but you need to be as an agency on that cutting edge of what's next so that all of our clients can feel comfortable and supported in this environment. And so I think that's where I would start, is kind of starting to research what are the next steps? What are other locations doing? Here in the Midwest, sometimes we're a little behind. So what are some of the more quote unquote forward thinking states doing so that we can make sure our communities are also responding in an appropriate way?
Right. And I would say, kind of on the individual end, one of the biggest things that I always tell people to do is to listen to members of marginalized populations. So like, sorry, I'm gonna move into the other room. So yeah, listening to marginalized populations. I would say, you know, whenever you're thinking about your social media feed or the books that you're reading, the movies you're watching, if you are participating in media and like engaging with media that is produced by people who are part of marginalized populations, so people who are part of the LGBTQ community, or people of color, or people from other religion spaces, socioeconomic classes, all of that, like you will learn the most about, you know, what is and isn't respectful, what is and isn't okay by sorry, she literally just decided to throw a fit.
That's all right.
Okay. You will learn a lot by continuing to listen to what those experiences are like and what are the things that are upsetting or that are disrespectful, because as people with privilege, there's a lot that we don't know, there's a lot that we don't see. A really good example of that is like our language, the way that people talk. Sometimes we have a lot of things ingrained into our language from whenever we were kids that is actually kind of prejudiced language toward another community. And that was stuff that I didn't start learning until the last couple years. But at the same time, I wouldn't have learned that if I wasn't listening to people on Twitter, honestly. Another thing, just as it's one of the really quickest things that an agency can do is start putting pronouns in your email signatures. It's something that isn't necessarily always noticed by everybody, but the people who need to see it will definitely notice.
I would like to add on a personal level, like something you can do is be aware of your own privilege. There's a ton of like tests out there. There's a ton of like, I know this sounds corny, but I kind of appreciate those BuzzFeed videos where it's talking about like talking to you as if in the whatever culture. So like these are the questions my culture gets asked all the time, and if I asked you as this race of person, you would think it's ridiculous.
Right.
So those are like this great kind of jumping off. They're sarcastic, they're kind of funny, but they are thought inducing if you let them be. And it's like, oh yeah, I've never thought about like, these things before. And so I think those are a good way to kind of get at like, because they tend to put a lot of stereotypes in there. So it's kind of nice to get thinking about things that we probably don't realize that we ask all the time and talk about. That's kind of what I like to do, just to be more aware of yourself.
Definitely.
Cool. Well, we all ran a little bit over, so the next couple questions are kind of going to be just little quick responses from you guys. The first one is how has Success tried to implement cultural responsiveness? Now I know a little bit about this being on the Success Grant, but you guys also worked on the Success Grant, and so I want to hear from you guys' perspective what you would say the Success Grant has done. Aubrey, you can go first.
I feel like the biggest thing that we have attempted to do, I don't know that we're perfect at it, we have lots of ways to grow, is just hearing more, or at least seeking out or attempting to seek out youth and family voice as part of our agencies, as well as I think each location has been tasked with looking at policies and procedures and making them more culturally responsive.
Definitely. I think there has been a lot done to seek out youth and family voice. I also will say that there's been a lot of just education being spread around, whether it be in formal trainings or just in a lot of the Success staff kind of going out and talking about stuff with their staff. There were a couple different situations where I was brought into conversations and people were saying like, I need this to be a learning experience for these staff. I need this to communicate what we want to look like going forward. So a lot of stuff has been done kind of on the ground too.
Yeah, I would agree. From my perspective, the trainings and stuff I've seen have been such a great benefit coming out of the Success Grant. And last year we hired a cultural competency coordinator, Aiden, and I think he's done a great job of helping produce materials and stuff that have helped achieve this goal that is kind of a big part of the Success Grant. So, well, is there anything else you guys would like our audience to know before we wrap up here that we might have missed?
I think I'm good.
I think I'm good as well.
Well, then that will conclude today's episode. Thank you, Aubrey and Danny, for joining me today. And thank you to our audience for taking a few minutes to listen. If you liked what you heard today, please be sure to subscribe to our latest updates and to share us with your coworkers, families, and friends. If you would like more information, you can visit our website, mosuccess.com. That's MOSOCCESS.com. You can also contact us there if you have any questions or comments. As the world starts to reopen, we hope that you'll take some time to get some fresh air. But as always, be wise, be safe, and have some grace as we all try to get back to normal. Thank you, and have a great day, everybody.